Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's first panel session on corporate VCs and health tech investments. I'm Tina Tan. I'm the executive editor of First Word MedTech. We're a provider of news and analyses of trends in the medtech and digital health space. And I'll be moderating the discussion today, and I'll be joined by the heads of digital investments from 4 corporate VC funds, and I'm sure you'll recognize the names, the companies behind these funds. They're major players in the pharma, life sciences, and consumer health sectors. Now, we know that corporate VCs play an important role in supporting the medtech and digital health ecosystem, especially in helping to sustain the flow of innovation. Yesterday, we heard from more traditional VCs about their perspectives on the digital health landscape and how that's evolved post-COVID, especially with the impact of the pandemic catapulting us into what everyone is calling a new normal. But the corporate VC is quite a different animal from the traditional VC, and investment strategies can vary quite widely between different corporate funds. So this is a real opportunity for the health tech entrepreneurs in our audience, or even the investors in our audience, to learn more about these strategies from our panelists and how they might have changed post-COVID. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat box throughout the session, and I'll ask the panelists your questions at a timely moment. Now, I'll just let the panelists introduce themselves and provide more details about their funds, whether they're more strategic or financial investors, and the type of investments they would typically be looking out for. So we'll start by first name, alphabetical order. Bruce.
Good morning. Thank you, Tina. My name is Bruce Meadows. I'm head of investments for Takeda Digital Ventures. We're a strategic and a financial investor, meaning that we're looking for digital health investments that are related to Takeda's business. We're a pharmaceutical company, number 7 in the world, and we have a number of different strategic areas related to our indications of interest. So we have a big oncology business, a big rare disease business, and if we can find companies that relate to what we're doing in the pharma world, then we're very interested in them. We're financial as well because we absolutely want to make a profit on our investments. We want to behave the same way as a financial VC, and so we're looking for that top quartile return as well. We're active and passive. So we have investments where we're on the board, we're lead investor in many of the investments, and we can also do a passive role as well. So we're relatively agnostic about that. But what is important to us is that we're looking for companies that have passed their proof of concept stage. So they've got a product or service that we can potentially introduce to Takeda straight away. That's great for our diligence, it's great for the companies, and that's really the mission of Takeda Digital Ventures. Thanks, Tina.
Great, thanks, Bruce. So really quite a mix there. You're like everything to everyone, basically. So let's move on to David.
Thanks, Tina. Good morning to the fellow panelists and to the audience. Based in Tel Aviv, we're Long Live Ventures. I'm David Gordon, head of investments for Long Live Ventures, and we're part of the greater CK Hutchison group. Hutchison is a very big multinational with lots of businesses, but we have a very specific mandate. So we are a VC. Strictly speaking, we're not a corporate VC, but we are very strategic in the sense, in the following sense. Hutchison runs the largest international chain of retail health and beauty, which also is known as drugstores. And our fund, Long Live Ventures, is mandated to find startups, technologies, and solutions that would find synergy with this amazing footprint. Now, when I say amazing footprint, it's 15,800 stores in 25 markets in Europe and Asia, all the way from the UK and Germany, onto the other side of the world, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, on and on, 25 markets, all in all, known brands or anywhere in your neighborhood, most likely. And this is a very unique story, I think, amongst us, among the investors community. We specifically look into retail health, consumer health, into community health, things that scale very big and can be accessed the same way that you can access anything else in the store or a service. So it's really at the peak of the consumerization of healthcare. We do not stop. We look into wellness. We don't stop at wellness. We look into real healthcare issues, medical issues. We love regulatory certification, which is a great due diligence milestone. We are active, therefore. We look to synergize. We invest. The thematic theme is the most important thing that does dictate a certain level of maturity, but we can go pretty early if the company has a line of sight to what they're doing and what the go-to market will be, and that it will involve something that our retail chains have today or may have in the future. As we all know, drugstores are evolving in their thinking and looking to contribute more value to the healthcare systems. So we are chartered to invest anywhere and comfortable with mid-sized tickets, say 5 million, and the thematic fit is really the number one criteria. We think that retail has a very important place in the future of healthcare, and we want to be there and help.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot, David. Ed?
Yeah, thanks. I'm a partner at Amadeus Capital and a venture advisor to M Ventures, and I'm sitting here today in my capacity as an advisor to M Ventures. M Ventures is the 400 million assets under management investment arm of the German Merck. For the avoidance of doubt, there's 2 Mercks in the world. We are part of the German Merck. Now, the mission by which we were established is really to back transformative science and exceptional entrepreneurs. So we've been doing that for the last 11 years. And we have roughly 2 activities. So one side of the activity is really the biopharma side, and the other side is more the deep tech side. I'm responsible for the deep tech and sustainability investment side. And there we basically look for early stage opportunities. So somewhat earlier than that Bruce described. We don't have to have product market fit. We don't have to have something that can be directly plugged in. The mission really here for us is to provide a window into the future and to future-proof the firm, so to say. So with that, we do behave as a financial investor as well, and by design, I would say. So the way that we're organized, we have all the investment activities are housed in a wholly owned yet completely separate subsidiary. Now, the reason for that is that we decided never to take any option rights or rights of first refusal, and to purely invest as a financial investor, of course, in strategic teams, but with the idea of connecting those companies to the Merck mothership, so to say. And then ultimately, whatever happens there, that's up to the teams on either side. The second idea with that is that we can take board seats as an active investor, and we can lead transactions. So the information rights are not only visibly, but also by design sort of walled off. So as a consequence, I would say we like to think we marry the best of both worlds by adding strategic value, by leveraging of the reach of the firm, by leveraging of the knowledge of the firm, while still having by design sort of a for-profit investment activity housed in a separate entity.
Great, thanks, Ed. And last but not least, Tamir.
Thanks, Tina. So I'm Tamir. I'm based in Israel. I am a senior manager of venture investments at JJDC, which is the strategic venture arm of Johnson & Johnson. Folks know J&J mainly for our consumer brands, but consumer is actually our smallest sector. We also have our Janssen colleagues responsible for pharma, and our 3 med device franchises, CSS, Ethicon, and DePuy Synthes. Out of Israel, we cover all 3 sectors, but also cover consumer and med devices in Europe in terms of jurisdiction. We have other JJDC colleagues globally. So we have colleagues in London, in Boston, San Francisco, and Shanghai who are covering these geographies from a jurisdiction perspective and very sector specific as well. Our investments are purely strategic, so that means that we invest in order to onboard, and onboarding can be either a company acquisition, an asset acquisition, a license, a marketing agreement, distribution agreement. But I guess the call out is there has to be a buy-in from an existing operating company within J&J to say, this falls on my strategy, and this is an asset that I'd like to own or market down the road as part of my portfolio of products in one way or the other based on a milestone, be it clinical, commercial, or other. Our digital investments have been very interesting over the past few years. They have been very, let's say, product or asset adjacent and not necessarily standalone assets. So they usually have to support an existing product or procedure or service we're providing as J&J, and not necessarily a standalone product like my esteemed colleagues on this panel. We do have situations where some investments transition from strategic to financial, either due to a change in the business or to a change at J&J, but our mandate for investments is purely strategic. And that's it.
Great, thanks a lot. So let's just kick off with the $60,000 question then. What is the appetite among corporate VCs for health tech now in this post-COVID era? We'll start off, Tamir, because I know JJDC has been a very prolific investor through the years. And has this part, we talk and we hear a lot about record-breaking investments in health tech, but what of the corporate VCs are you contributing to these record-breaking investments in health tech?
So yeah, health tech is a pretty broad definition, right? You could include digital therapeutics there. You could include data science companies. You could include, computer vision companies like Zebra, right? So we've been very active in that field, and I think it's been due to a change of mind, I guess, in all of our opcos in the last few years, where we could take health tech and digital in general to both improve outcomes for our patients as well, but also from a clinical perspective, how can we improve the efficacy and safety of our products as well. So this has been a core message in why we're doing digital and health tech investments. I think over the past few years, you can see that we've been active in all three sectors in the health tech space, so consumer, farm, and med devices. But I think the core underlying message there was, it has to provide value to our existing products and not necessarily be a standalone product. So, if I'd say, is there any change at J&J from an appetite perspective before, during, or after? And I think we're still way before the after COVID era. I think it hasn't changed. I think it started growing a few years ago, but it remained pretty constant since, especially recognizing that the entire reason we do external innovation and investments in external parties is to bring in technologies and capabilities we simply don't have at J&J to develop internally. And this is sort of been a core value for us in this area.
Great. All right. So with now, David, because your long live is very much focused on looking for investments that that has synergies with this massive retail pharmacy footprint of CK Hutchison. This must be like a boom time for you in terms of the amount of innovations that are coming up, digitally enabled innovations for well-being. Especially now we see a lot of regulatory and reimbursement barriers being some of it temporarily put down because of COVID-19 emergency measures. What about you? Have you seen any changes, and have there been any changes in your investment strategies at all?
Yeah, it's absolutely a great question, and you're right. I mean, in terms of the community, I think the message that will come out of here, like others, is that this is really I don't know if it's a second chance, but it certainly is a huge time of opportunity as a general statement for healthcare startups, and for some, a second chance, a third chance, and for some, an initial ignition for something new. For our, first, maybe we start from the end. We're full speed ahead. We actually completed during the COVID a follow-on investment in a portfolio company, and we're about almost completed with the due diligence on a new company, in terms of our portfolio. I think I think the question, what has changed in this time is will be down to the essence of this type of a conversation, which is that elusive strategic fit thing. So I'm sure that everyone will identify with, when it boils down to the truth, strategic fit is a very difficult concept. No startup company really can afford to tie its faith to a roadmap of a big company, certainly not a group of companies. And yet that's how we act. So what I think has happened for us and for most folks is strategic fit has become tighter and then maybe refocused. There's maybe less tolerance for a looser strategic fit, and people are expecting to articulate very well how they see this happening. Whereas before you could say, it's a mega trend in the industry and we're interested in the mega trend, so it's strategic fit. Now people are looking, at least for this near future, people are looking for a tighter strategic fit, because obviously the COVID era has added two major groups of risks to our business, although healthcare is still there. One is, and you'll talk about this later, I'm sure you'll ask, is the logistic risk of new risks that you didn't have before in trying to assess a company. And the second one is the future has become seemingly much more uncertain. And even in the business of healthcare, the priorities are different. So all these new risks are pretty heavy, and therefore people are looking to eliminate risks in other things. So we're not going to go wide, we're going to go deep in terms of themes.
Interesting. So in looking about, you talked about how the future is now more uncertain. So Ed, with M Ventures, you highlighted how you're very much a financial investor as opposed to a strategic investor. And Tamir already said how, sort of assured our audience that corporate venture investing is still at, J&J anyway is maintaining their level of corporate venture investing. David also put out quite a optimistic sort of view there in terms of long live putting money into health tech investments. With M Ventures, obviously your investment strategy will be tied to, the exit landscape. What is the exit landscape like post-COVID, and how has that impacted your investment strategy in this post-COVID era?
Yeah, it's not an easy one to be put on the spot for. First, I have to make a classifier because otherwise I'll probably be vilified by my colleagues. We actually are 50% strategic, 50% return driven. And so the way it works for us, every initial investment is a strategic investment, but every follow-on decision is purely financial. And the reason we've done that is to make sure that we're aligned with co-investors who end up usually being traditional institutional investors. Coming to your question, and sort of like coming from that secondary part there, that we have that financial focus for any follow-on investment. What we've seen is sort of a level of introspection for the last couple of months, where people just looked at the supply chains of their respective portfolio companies, pressure tested sort of like whether the companies had enough capital to sit it out for a while. And I guess having been a little bit more disciplined also on pricing for follow-on rounds. So in that, and sort of like having huddled together with our co-investors in our portfolio companies, we then looked outside and indeed looked at the exit environment and tried to assess what it means for us, sort of to connect the companies towards that ultimate goal. I guess the good news is public markets are still frothy and open. There is a ton of cash out there with regards to strategic buyers. It's just on an anecdotal level, we've seen a lot of people in those strategic buyers, to which of course our fund belongs to one of those, sort of like being extra cautious and making sure that they sit back and really demand an extra level of either evidence or revenues in order to make sure that the investments that are being acquired are actually going to be successful. So it seems that the bar is somewhat higher, and therefore it seems that the amount of capital needed is more, and that combined with somewhat slower timelines for actually product validation, it all comes together that we're somewhat more cautious, but we're definitely still investing because we still think it's a great time to invest, and it's actually a great time to deploy right now. Plus, we feel it's our obligation to deploy and back companies in this stage.
I guess, when you talk about this, the bar being higher and more caution being practiced, that ties in what David was saying. Even when looking at investments, your strategic fit is quite, you're looking more closely at how it actually aligns rather than like looking at like more sort of like broader macro trends, but actually trying to find where exactly an investment could bring strategic benefits to your organization. And in terms of the buys, actually, Bruce, I know that one of your portfolio companies, Guido, you recently sold that to another health tech company, actually, an emerging company from my mother country, Singapore, Biofomis. Can you tell me how that came about? Was that something that, do you think Biofomis as a health tech company is on the up because it is riding on this sort of like a wave, this digital health wave because of COVID, and so it is looking to expand, and so this deal with Guido came around, or was it something that's been bubbling around for a while?
Sure. So for those people who don't know Biofomis, it's a remote patient monitoring company. So it's focusing on monitoring patients with various types of diseases. Guido was a company that Takeda actually created to do remote patient monitoring in oncology patients. We decided to focus in on that group of patients because it's close to our therapeutic area. And after we had been developing that product for about a year, we looked at what was happening in the market and realized that probably it made sense to have this as part of a larger group that was looking at multiple different disease states and leverage the learning they were getting for different indications and different patient groups. So we actually started a process and we approached a number of different companies, and we felt that Biofomis was the best fit for Guido, and so we put it there. But on exits, I think it's a very exciting time right now. I just need to put a little bit of a plug in for one of our companies, American Well. It's filed its S1. It's looking like I can't say too much about it, but I hope that that's going to be going public very soon. We see other big health tech IPOs filing like GoodRx. I think that the exit opportunities in digital health are tremendous right now. But the corollary to that is that the prices that we have to pay to invest in these companies pre-IPO has gone very, very high. And we've run a number of diligences during COVID on companies that just have excellent quality, amazing validation now because their businesses are booming, but they're priced at a level that absolutely 100% has to go right with their business plan to justify the valuation. And that's just too much risk for us right now, which is a pity because we've seen a lot of great companies out there.
That's interesting. Oh, sorry.
Tina, can I quickly react to that? Because what you're illustrating there, Bruce, is very interesting, I think. The companies who really benefit in this domain are oftentimes the software companies and the ones who provide a novel channel at this point to basically enable that decentralization. We actually invest quite a bit in sort of like hardware first companies as well. And those are the ones struggling. So I guess if you look at the total healthcare technology landscape, it's sort of a mixed bag. If you segment it indeed by software first, novel channel, you see clear winners on that side, as Bruce is definitely illustrating, and some guys who are really losers. I'll give you one example. A portfolio company of ours is dependent on a fab in Sweden. That means that you're loading the company with political risk around Sweden's policies around COVID, because if the fab there closes, all of a sudden the supply chain is disrupted and this company cannot build the sensors that they're actually demanding for their products. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but definitely on the software first side, clear winners.
Yeah, Ed, sorry, Tina. Yeah, Ed, I agree with that. I think that the things that have changed with our fund since COVID started is we started looking at exactly what you said. Companies that have got new channels for engaging patients, engaging healthcare professionals, engaging any other stakeholder that's in our value chain. And if we can, because for example, we have an enormous number of salespeople at the peak of COVID who were locked down, who couldn't go and raise awareness of our therapies, couldn't go see their customers, couldn't interact with patients. So we needed new technologies, and we're still on the outlook for good companies like that.
Yeah, from our point of view as investors, the traction parameter has become very difficult for, I think, definitely like earlier stage companies. If you're expecting to see things happening in their business, partnerships, people willing to invest in innovation, all that has become kind of, let's talk in the next quarter. And lots of times they're totally dependent. Their roadmap, their operational roadmap is totally dependent on that. That would include clinical trials that all of a sudden need to be postponed. So everything gets kind of stretched out, and that therefore those folks in that stage are at higher risk, and they're going to burn more money and all that. And that may change. People are learning to live with as the COVID prolongs itself. People are going back to business, but priorities may be different.
Tamir, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I second David's comment. I actually see the clinical trial delays and sort of difficulty in recruitment of patients and enrollment still a bit more on the pharma med device side. In digital companies, it's still honestly a bit easier, albeit still more difficult than normal days. So there is sort of a chicken and the egg question coming out with investors wanting to see some validation, and the company is basically having a problem recruiting the patients. So you're sort of getting this loop at the end of the day, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to all of you alluded to this point about how the quality, it all boils down to like the quality of the investment at the end of the day. And I had indicated that we've seen this huge flood of like innovations coming through, and there's obviously a lot of potential investment opportunities there. But in terms of the quality, because of course, and then Bruce mentioned about how, because there's all this excitement around digital investments now, that helps, that rightly or wrongly pushes the valuation of a lot of companies up. And what do you think, are you seeing a lot of the innovations that you're seeing? Are they mainly Me Too, or is there true innovation? And for you, what does that mean? What is true differentiated innovation to you, something that really gets you excited? Maybe we can start with David, because I think, in the consumer health space, I'm sure there's just loads and loads of like, I feel anyway, a lot of Me Too products, which I have to say I struggle to like find a differentiating factor. What do you think?
No, I totally agree that there's an enormous amount of deal flow out there, and a lot it seems mighty similar. I think maybe two things are happening here. So the first is digital therapeutics, that concept that I think was almost going to somehow dissolve itself before the COVID era. And the companies that will be successful will be sorted out to whether they're telemedicine or remote diets. But the general idea of an app that's prescribed and reimbursed was about to that generic category was about to vanish. I think it's come back in terms of the hype. And so innovation in that front, if you can find real new IP beyond obvious things that can actually create scalable services, because just brokering remotely a practitioner, whether it's a mental health practitioner or a doctor, that doesn't scale well. But you can automate things. If you can automate things and provide remotely services, medical services, healthcare services to people, you have a big chance. So we look a lot for that, things that can actually scale, because the big second chance that we have now is many people suddenly got it in terms of remote services. The second thing is very much more tangible, and that's about point of care diagnostics. I think that the point of care side of diagnostics has been greatly accelerated, the motivation. It was a trend before, decentralizing the laboratory, but now the race for self-testing and point of care testing, which of course interests our drugstores very much as well, because that's a service that they can provide. But that's something we really want. We really want decentralized, cost-effective, quick testing, and it will go beyond COVID. Not everyone can pivot to COVID. Most people should not. That's if you're looking for tips. But those were the two areas I think we look hard now. Is in terms of the digital therapeutics, the app with a second chance, and the rise of point of care diagnostics.
Great, thanks. I've got quite a few questions coming through now, so I think I'll.
Can I maybe add one thing to that?
Mm-hmm.
I think I love what you're saying, David, and maybe just to add one sentence for us, and for me personally, there's one key thing, and that is that technology has the ability to cut the feedback cycle. So the biggest risk is delayed feedback, at least in our thesis. And so bringing the point of action closer towards the onset of the action. So for example, the diagnosis closer to the onset of a disease, the dosing closer to the point where it's actually needed, the medicine closer, the precision medicine closer to the point where it actually impacts the patient. That is what we look for in everything in this domain. And then from there, from that nucleus, we can look at different markets and we make our decision based on that.
Okay, great. So there is one question here, which I guess this would be for panelists who say that they invest more in companies that have already done proof of concept. Because the question is, how much preclinical evidence would the speakers like to see from their prospects? So I guess, Bruce, you mentioned that the investments that you tend to look at would be the ones that have already carried some proof of concept. Would they already done animal studies?
Well, in many ways, this question is not relevant to us because we're purely digital. So for instance, we might be looking at a data company and we want to know how they're able to aggregate data. So we would like to see them with perhaps a pilot customer on board. It's not really
benchmark, sorry. I meant like, I guess with digital, like benchtop testing or like a small, rather than, I guess, the
easiest way to put it is,
Mm-hmm.
the easiest way to put it is, I think that I would like to introduce our portfolio companies to Takeda for potential commercial collaboration. And I don't want Takeda to be the first company that is doing the collaboration. So I'd like to see that there being at least one pilot, one example of them working with a third party for their product or service. And then I think that's the validation we're looking for to push forward.
I can take this as well, Tina. Same for us, even though we do invest in med devices, and for example, in devices, we'd actually like to see clinical evidence most of the times before investing, not just preclinical. But specifically about digital companies, normally we'd like to see some sort of validation. It could be an in silico study that really proves the point using retrospective data, but at least some sort of proof of concept to really help validate the algorithm, the technology, the offering. If it's something that's more business model oriented, to see some sort of a pilot in one territory or the other to say, this has worked in Germany, Austria, and can easily be translated to the UK and then potentially to the US and other big markets. So some sort of proof of concept commercially or clinically is necessary.
I would agree totally, and what bringing down to practical terms, people will obviously, everyone wants this type of evidence, but people oftentimes will say, well, they replace it depending on the genre with traction, like early adopters, crowdfunding numbers, or alternatively just scientific peer-reviewed articles, and both don't qualify because that means that they're really not appreciating enough the implementation risk. So certainly a study that stands to reason. I usually ask the founders really, what made you convinced that this could actually work? There's so much ahead of you. So certainly some kind of study is essential. Without that, we wouldn't invest.
I have my follow-on question from that is, do you think that would digital health companies now have to implement some sort of like a clinical strategy within their business plan, because if you want your product to be taken seriously, not just like a wellness product, but something that can really effectuate a clinical outcome, would they need to really start thinking about, no matter how small, some sort of like a clinical trial to show that it really does have an impact on patients? Let me ask Ed this question first.
Yeah, for us, absolutely. But I also want to make the point that there's sort of three components to this, which oftentimes are confused. The first one is clinical evidence doesn't necessarily lead to medical approval. It's a question whether you want to go that route, and not every solution has to have that, even though clinical evidence might be really valuable for the solution. And then the other one is that even regulatory approval will not necessarily lead to reimbursement. So I guess the answer to your question is really more from a top-down perspective. In other words, where are you going to, what is the market you're serving, and what evidence is needed to serve that market, rather than just building bottom-up and just expecting things to fall in place once clinical evidence is being achieved.
Mm. Now, to me, I know that JJDC, you are quite a hands-on investor. You do help a lot of your portfolio companies sort of take their product through to market. And I'm just wondering, like, what's your view in terms of like trying, do you encourage your digital health tech investments to really think about including clinical evidence to back their technologies?
So certainly, so those that are oriented towards our pharma and med device business have even the obligation to do so from a regulatory perspective in any territory they decide to work in. But I can, even test about the consumer apps and digital companies that we've been supporting or investing in across the world. J&J is a very science-based organization. So anything we invest in has to be very scientifically and clinically validated. So while we may invest before there is full-fledged clinical validation, this is definitely sort of a requirement for us to see down the road to really validate the technology and say it really works from a data perspective. So it's definitely a requirement for us to have to feel comfortable with the technology or the product itself to show that it really works.
Okay, great. We actually have time. Time's running out very, very quickly, and I will be remiss as a moderator if I don't ask a few more questions from the audience. There's one here which I guess is tied into, we could tie in with our conclusion, which is like, how can startups enhance their chances of getting the attention from corporate VCs? And it would be good if we go around the proverbial table and ask what is the piece of most important advice you can give to a health tech startup who might want to get your attention. What should or should they not do? So let's start with Tamir.
So I'll start with the don'ts, because this is sort of a thing I've seen ever since COVID started, is here is how my product can help treat or mitigate COVID. And I haven't tested it in any other way, but here's how I can do this. It's definitely a me too. And I've seen hundreds of those over the course of the past 6 months. So unless you have real validation, don't even think about it. That's probably a don't for me. On do's, I'd say, and it's more of a general sense, our investments are obviously strategic, so it has to tie into an existing product or service or procedure we're doing. So whenever you're pitching to a corporate VC that is strategic, try in your pitch to tie it into an existing product, as in this will increase sales of this OTC drug because the validation of the patient specificity will be better. Or, for example, the yield of the procedure will be better, the clinical outcomes will be better because you're doing this at a 40% market share, and we could either increase your market share or the outcome of the procedure will be better. So tie it into an existing product, help me sell it within the organization without trying to figure it out myself.
Great, that's really insightful advice there. Ed?
Yeah, for us, it comes down to three things. I guess the first one is evidence is key, no matter how small the body of evidence, but we need to know that there's at least some grounding that whatever the proposition is, that it works. The second is play to your strengths. In other words, you know, the competitive landscape we see oftentimes being compared to only things that are really closely related to the offering, whereas oftentimes it's simply what else can the end consumer use or acquire for the same dollar spent. So play to your strengths, and whether that's cutting the feedback loop or, for example, augmenting the outcome of a therapy, at least have thought it through and sort of like have plotted that pathway all the way to market and puzzled things back together. We'll work together on whether we think it's realistic. We have a lot of data points in that respect, but at least think it through. And then the last point, I guess, for us is the demonstration of near-term value. So what is the ability, once this is on the market, to really impact either patients, physicians, payers, whatever?
Great. And let's move to Bruce now.
Oh, very good. Look, I think one of the things that separates the best CEOs when they pitch to me from the other ones is that very early on, they asked me what's important. And I think, you know, on this panel today, we've got 4 different corporate VCs. We all think about the world differently. Some of us are thinking more financial, some of us more strategic, and strategic means something different for each of us. So you can get my attention by asking me, what problem am I trying to solve with my venture fund? I know what problem you're probably trying to solve, which is you need money. And then let's work as a partnership and see if we can solve those problems together. That helps tremendously.
But do you feel that sometimes they should have already done their homework beforehand and like?
Oh, look, it's really hard. You know, I've had a quick look at the websites of everybody on here, and I don't think that any website really gets the nuance of what are we looking for, what really is going to drive us to make an investment decision. And when you're face to face, either in person or like we are today, you can ask those questions and get so much more information, and then be prepared to be a little bit flexible in your pitch to meet those needs that I've just told you about.
Great. All right, thanks. And we've got David.
Yeah, I think I will end with something that may be supposedly a bit contradictory to what Bruce brought up, but let's see. First of all, I think people should be very careful when they come up with a platform. You know, they have a capability and they have an initial usage. We're talking about early stage. So, focus on the initial application that people can build a reasonable business model around, and the strategic fit could be apparent, rather than say we have a platform and it can do 700 things and you won't have validation for any. So that's on your theme, strategic design of your theme. The second thing is be intellectually candid. So what is your real bag of assets? And please tell me up front what you have and what you don't have. It just wastes time to wait till I find out that what you don't have is not a good strategy. And we appreciate, I think, very much, being able to move fast and focus on what people have managed to achieve. Hopefully it includes that validation thing. The strategic fit for us, what we see oftentimes is people say, reminding that we are looking for things that scale big, that can be supported by retail. When people come and obviously, like Bruce says, they're looking for money, they will all of a sudden have a new go-to-market strategy, or even worse, they'll say, if you invest, we can change, and that won't interest us. So if you're going to come to us for the strategic fit, it really needs to be there. It needs to make sense. It needs to be part of your plans, that retail can make a difference, that you really do want to reach the masses, that you do think that out-of-pocket money could be useful, or that the access and reach that retail has can be helpful for your business. But it doesn't make sense to hear for the first time what we need and then change your story on the fly. That doesn't fly for us.
Brilliant. That's really good advice all around, and I'm sure the audience has a lot of good takeaways there from what our panelists have said today. So that just leaves me to thank all our panelists for their valuable contribution to the discussion today, and also I'd like to thank you, the audience, for listening in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
Thanks.